Hi there, and welcome to No Thesis, No Problem. I am Aly Sebright, one of the writing coaches here at the Boise State Graduate Student Success Center, and I'm here to walk you through all of the non-thesis culminating activity options we offer here at Boise State, depending on your program, and kind of going through what might be involved with those projects, what those projects are doing for you, and kind of how you can tackle them best if you're thinking that a thesis is not the way to go for you. Um, so first things first, let's go over what is a culminating activity anyway. So the term culminating activity refers to a summary exercise that is carried out with a high degree of independence, is based on advanced study and accumulated graduate experience. It is integrative in nature and is typically completed at the end of a graduate student's academic career. The traditional culminating activities for master's students and doctoral students are the thesis and the dissertation, respectively, but master's students in the United States now engage in many other forms of culminating activities, such as projects, portfolios, capstone courses, a series of practicums, recital for performing arts, and comprehensive examinations. Satisfactory completion of a culminating activity or part of a culminating activity is normally recorded by a grade in a graduate course specifically set up for that purpose. For example, the course of 592 in your respective program and the portfolio class. So this comes directly from the Boise State course catalog. This is kind of where Boise State is defining what they think a culminating activity is, what that can look like. And I think what this does is it kind of outlines for you what this is trying to do, right? What the portfolio or the capstone course or the project, what those pieces of work are trying to get you to accomplish, right? And ultimately what that is to reflect the mastery you have and the knowledge you have gained over your course of time in graduate school and what you've learned through your program. In the same way that a thesis or a dissertation does the same thing, right? It's your chance to kind of step up and speak and really show what you know. So that being said, let's kind of talk about what your options are. So your options range all over the place depending on your program, but most of them are going to fall under the bolded options I have here. So portfolio projects, creative projects, recital or performance projects that fall into like that creative project realm, as well as artistic works and portfolios for anybody who's in a visual arts or performing arts program. And then there's also regular capstone projects and practicum / internship projects, all of which are kind of the majority of what we see here at Boise State. They are certainly not the only ones. We also have program specific projects. A lot of these times where these are kind of paired up with practicum or internship projects, but not exclusively. And then there's also coursework options for graduation, comprehensive examinations, and like we all know, the tried and true thesis or dissertation. As I note down here, right, all of these options vary program to program, so be sure to check with your advisor, who's usually your program director or your committee chair, and see if any of these are applicable for your project type. See if any of these options are available in your program, what options are available, because while these are all the ones offered by Boise State, your specific program might have certain rules about what they expect from students and what they expect in terms of those final culminating activities. That being said, we have a broad range of options here, so I'm going to try to cover as many bases over the course of this as possible, but obviously I can't walk you through every single one just yet. And so this is a conversation you would very likely be having with your advisor or committee chair or the director of your program to kind of go over what your options are and how you want to go about going through that project, because so much of this project is defined by the fact that you need a lot of support systems to get it done. It's a lot of work, but that being said, these other options exist to kind of make that more accessible for you as a student and find a way to do your research and express your research in a way that makes sense to you, that's functional for you, and can also help in terms of your career if you're looking to publish later, or if you're not looking to go into academia, to have a portfolio of other work you might be able to show for potential employers. All of these are great options that these different options can give you, and as well as a thesis or dissertation. So beyond what just your options are, I'm going to kind of walk through some of the heavy hitters that I mentioned before, right? The ones that we see happening more commonly, and kind of walk you through what these look like in terms of the actual documents themselves. So one of the bigger ones that we see that's really, really common alternative to a thesis is a portfolio. So portfolio culminating activities typically are a collection of examples of students' work throughout their graduate academic career that exemplify their knowledge of a subject, their mastery of a learning process, any kind of publishable scholarship they might have done over the course of their time in graduate school, and then the completion of special projects or themes or creative activities that you've been kind of exploring throughout your time in your graduate program. So that portfolio, again, can be a really, really great tool to have when you're going into the job market. For example, like if you want to go into academia and you want to work as a teacher and you've taken education courses while you've been in college, or not in college, in graduate school, and you want to be able to show kind of, here are some syllabuses that I've already written and some like course samples of courses that I would love to teach that you can already give a potential employer. And the same thing goes for other subjects, right? Or if you don't want to work in academia, if you are a visual artist and you want to be able to give a portfolio of your work that you've done so far, if you're an engineering student who wants to give a portfolio of kind of some of the engineering projects you've worked on already, any of these things can be really, really helpful. So a lot of the time, these alternatives to thesis projects in terms of culminating activities exist to give you an opportunity to suit the program and ultimately that culminating activity towards what you're doing next. It really gives you a chance to kind of set yourself up for success. Additionally, portfolios should have the students' thoughts on the learning process, demonstrating the grasp they have of key information and or exhibiting the development of crucial skills in their field. This can be reflected through an introductory essay, which is something we'll go over, learning logs and reflective journals that you perform throughout the time that you're working on your project. So little pieces of reflection or writing that kind of reflect your thought process as you're going through your project. And another way this can be reflected is through annotated bibliographies, which are kind of a fun combination of these that we'll also go over in this presentation. Typically, portfolios are graded on a pass-fail basis. You do still have to defend with most portfolio projects when you finish them. So that defense looks pretty similar to an average thesis defense, but obviously it'll be a little bit different just due to the nature of the project being a little bit different. But these projects should, as all of these do, require equivalent work to the number of credit hours taken to complete the project, right? So if you are not doing a thesis or dissertation and you want to explore one of these alternative options, you will have to sign up, as the catalog kind of mentioned, for an equivalent course that gives you the credit hours to be working on this project, the same way you would get those credit hours for writing a thesis or dissertation. So, other culminating activities such as capstones. So capstones are a little bit different. They require an enrollment in a program capstone course. So this is typically the final project of the course that is considered the culminating activity. So completing that capstone course is kind of the completion of this project, and this project is usually integrated into that class and its syllabus and curriculum. This option typically includes a required co-requisite internship for a lot of programs. This isn't necessarily across the board, but most of the time we notice that these capstone courses pair usually up with some kind of internship or volunteer opportunity. So be sure to also check the options for your program. See if there is an option. If you're doing a capstone, is there a chance for you to do an internship and get some really valuable experience that can help to further set yourself up for success? So that's another conversation to have with your program director or your advisor. Either of those options could be great places to kind of go over what a capstone culminating activity might be able to do for you. These are also typically letter graded, and the course grade is taken as a culminating activity grade. So whatever you get in the course as a final grade usually translates as your culminating activity grade as well. Furthermore, like I said, this activity can be something that's really, really varied depending on your program, right? Because this course is also determined by your program. So be sure, if you're interested in this option, to really talk to your advisor and understand kind of what that project might look like, even if you don't know specifically what class that would be, in terms of who's teaching it, what semester you're taking it. Any of those things are things you can would go over with your program director or your advisor. And then another kind of culminating activity project we see really frequent are these kind of creative culminating activity projects. So as I mentioned before, these can be artistic portfolios or recitals and performances. But either way, either of these options usually include an artist statement or some kind of written work explaining the art pieces or performances, giving more detail into kind of the background of how it was created, how the project developed, how you got to the point that you're at, where you're drawing inspiration and sources from, where you did your research from, all of these things that kind of ultimately led to this artistic performance or portfolio, whatever kind of artistic piece we're ending up looking at here. These projects can also include an annotated bibliography or a literature review, depending on your program, so be sure to check on that. A lot of programs' websites, when you go to like their graduate student website, they have these details listed out of like what specifically is going to be required. But if you're confused at all, or if you feel like you aren't able to find these resources, I would say definitely sit down, like I said, and I probably will say so many times in this, really sit down and talk to your advisor or your program director when you're kind of going over these options so you really understand what's going to be expected of you. It's best to know and then be able to adjust your plan to suit that rather than to find out too late and then be rushing to get it done. Like all other things, this is also graded on a pass-fail basis. So usually you will still have a committee or something similar to that who will get together to go over your pieces or your portfolio or your performance and give you responses, feedback, and maybe have some form of defense in that way. So moving along, we have our practicum-based activities. So these practicum-based culminating activities, usually similar to the capstone, work in conjunction with an internship. These almost exclusively work within an internship because it is kind of this idea of the expression of practical knowledge that you have gained over the time of some kind of training or skills building more active learning situation, usually related to an internship or an assistantship of some kind. So this is kind of for field work or experience-based education, but may also require an additional written portion kind of reflecting on your experience and giving you the chance to kind of speak about what you learned, how you learned it, what your experience in your internship or other field work position, what that did for you, what you learned from it, good and bad things that came from it. These are all appropriate to include, and they're actually really valuable because they're giving you the chance to also kind of analyze your experience and place yourself within that deeper discourse. These other written portions can usually look like learning logs or weekly reflections that kind of break up the amount of work that you have to do, right? So that way you get a better sense of where you were every step along the way with your kind of journey in this field work experience. Or this internship, and that way you can kind of see your progression. So if you only have to write one final reflection on it, you can kind of track your progress with it. So I highly recommend, even if you don't have to do learning logs or weekly reflections, but you are planning on doing a practicum-based culminating activity, I would say it's a really great idea to still get in practice with doing it, because you're also just making it easier for yourself down the road. It'll be much, much easier if you already have a little bit of a basis to go off of. Even just writing, a quick page or so, going over your experience in a week or a day every time you're going into your internship can be really, really helpful for you to reference back later. Again, like all these, they are graded on a complete or incomplete / pass-fail basis. So essentially, you'll turn it into your committee or program advisor, and they will go over it with you. You might potentially have also a bit of a thesis defense type situation here, although that is not necessarily a part of every program. So again, check with your directors and your advisors. So other popular things that we go over when talking about culminating activities is these other kinds of popular project documents. So to your advisor, which is the number one thing I recommend, but also by being able to come here at the GSSC and talk to one of us writing coaches. We can also kind of help you figure out what parts you all need in this and what is expected of each of these different kinds of documents, right? What's the difference between an introduction and an artist statement and a personal statement and a project proposal and all these different things. But all the same, a really popular project document that most people have to write, thesis or otherwise, is some kind of introductory essay. So these can include portfolio introductions, they can be artist statements, personal statements, and then also most people have to do some kind of project proposal that also typically is made up of a lot of the same information that you would find in these kind of introductory essays that I've listed here. So these essays typically explain a few different things. So we'll kind of go over all of those. The main one that it needs to explain is the what of your project, right? So what does the project consist of? What are the pieces that make it up, right? If it's a portfolio and it's made up of multiple pieces, or if it is like one larger performance piece or something, kind of going over exactly what all is going into this project. What did completing the project entail for you? Was it just writing? Was it a performance? Was it research? Was it surveys? Was there experimentation involved? Any of these things is where you kind of go over this. And then ultimately, you really need to hit home what questions or problems is the project trying to address or answer. So kind of getting into that idea of what the project is functionally doing for you as a student in order to educate yourself further, or for your community, or both. How are you engaging in the discourse? Any of these questions are great and important to answer in any of these kinds of introductory essays I have listed here. The other answer that's really important to cover when you're writing these is also the why. So why did you choose to do this project? What was the kind of exigence or originating idea that led you to do this project rather than a traditional thesis project? Going over this is really, really important because it can also make sure that you answer some of those what questions, but they can also be important because they can, again, give you an opportunity to kind of show what you know, show how you familiarized yourself with your field and the discourses in it prior to doing this project, and then seeing how you can engage in those discourses with the project itself. And then for portfolios or art pieces and things of that nature, why were the specific works that make up this project selected? And why are they placed in conversation with each other in this portfolio? What is that doing for you? What is that saying to the discourse? Again, all of these things are really, really important to hit on and think about, is just the why behind each of the choices you made. Because even if you don't necessarily have to have them answered in the documents themselves, which you typically do, they're also important answers to know in the case of any kind of defense that you might have to do in the future. So to continue along talking about introductory essays, one of the other things about these documents that you need to explain is also kind of the how, the where, the who. The bigger one being the how. So similar to one of the questions we had on the last slide, how did you come up with the idea for your project, right? So if the exigence is maybe, you want to do a community-based project about food deserts in the US. And so the exigence might just be, you yourself as a graduate student might have experienced food insecurity or come from an area that experiences food insecurity. And that was the problem you noticed. And then you decided you wanted to solve that. And then ultimately from there, you came up with ideas for how to create and execute a project in your community to help with food insecurity in the US or Idaho or whatever you wanted to do. So it would be really, really important to explain not only kind of that exigence and what led you towards that project, but also how you further developed that problem and your response to that problem or your desire to solve that problem into a fully fledged project and idea. And then again, like I said before, if there are multiple works in the project for portfolios, how do these pieces connect, relate, or build off of each other? That's a really important thing to acknowledge, because then when your reader goes through and past the introductory essay and is kind of experiencing your portfolio for what it is, it's your chance to kind of prep them, to give them an idea of what they're getting into and how these things should be connecting and what things they should be noticing tie into each other. Other things you might want to include in your introductory essays, right? Again, so introductions, artist statements, project proposals, personal statements, any of these things, is to also explain the where and the who. So in terms of where, for internship-based projects, this is really important. Where was the project completed? Where are you interning? Where are you getting this experience from? But this also might be relevant if you are doing a certain kind of like performative art piece or art pieces in general, especially photography, other things like that. If it feels relevant, then it's never a bad idea to include the kind of where of it all. The other thing you might want to explain is who. So who is involved in this project beyond yourself and your community, if anyone. So again, if you're doing an internship and you're working with community outreach, or you're doing an internship and you want to mention your kind of supervisor there who's helping you in that department, it's always important to give credit where credit is due and acknowledge who all is involved with this project. And then again, if you are doing a more analytical kind of piece in a portfolio or something, and you're focusing on the work of a particular artist or a scholar, or building upon their ideas, who are these scholars or artists or whoever it is that you're kind of focusing on, and why are you choosing to focus on them or their work? These are all really great questions to make sure that your reader is aware of before getting into the meat of your project. So other popular project documents are annotated bibliographies. So annotated bibliographies are, many of you might have experienced them in undergrad. At the graduate level, they do get a little bit different, more in the sense of you're expected to do graduate level work with them. So these documents, if you're unfamiliar, they give readers a sense of where your perspective and knowledge is coming from, and they essentially act as like a highlight reel of your research, of the things that you found really impactful and helpful. So this document should be able to tell your reader who or what you read for your project, why you chose to read those particular pieces, and how those pieces ultimately influenced your final project. So similar to a works cited page, right? A lot of the time you will include all the works that you cite if there is a written portion that needs a works cited page. But especially if you have a piece that doesn't require a works cited page, this is kind of your place to show your research skills and show what you did research-wise to get this project done. You might not necessarily always have the opportunity to reference a source directly, but you do want to give credit where credit is due, especially for great ideas. And what this can also do is, for future researchers and for future students, they can see your annotated bibliography and understand where your ideas came from, and then further be able to use that to inform their own research going forward, should they read your project and be interested in it and be interested in developing it or something similar. It's also a really great thing to have for publication, because it's also a great way to get in touch with the journals that you've already read a lot from, journals that you recognize as being valuable to your field in the particular area of discourse that you're engaging in. It can be really, really helpful to have an annotated bibliography written out that already shows your associations with these journals as a reader and then potentially as a writer for them. So yeah, these annotated bibliographies should try to answer the following questions. So where might your reader see the influences of the pieces listed in your annotated bibliography within your project itself? Do you cite these pieces directly in the project itself, or is this something that you also read but didn't have the chance to cite? That might be a good thing to acknowledge. Do these sources give you broad or specific help in regards to your project, right? Is it like immediately applicable, or is it more of like a theoretical idea that helps to inform your approach? Then you also want to answer, how do the pieces that you read for this project relate or respond to one another? How did they help your overall understanding of a topic and how you built your perspective? It's entirely great and probably encouraged to include pieces that maybe you read and disagreed with and decided to respond with your own research and your own project in response to something that maybe you read and you felt was the opposite of maybe how you think things should be, or you're kind of offering a new research alternative or something like that. That's a really, really great thing to include, because it also shows really active engagement with the discourse to the point of mastery, right? Because you're able to encounter other writers and other discourse happening in the field and recognize whether or not you yourself agree with it, and or you're able to really critically think about it and put it in context with other ideas. So to go on about annotated bibliographies here, so annotated bibliographies, if you're also unfamiliar, their formatting should include citations in the typical style of your field. Again, this is something you might want to check with your program director or your committee chair or your advisor, whoever that may be, to find out which style you should be sticking to. But usually it's going to fall under the heads of MLA, APA, or Chicago. But again, check with your program director, your advisor, any of those people can probably tell you. These citations are then followed by a short annotation that explains the key points of the cited work, an evaluation of the quality of that work, and an explanation of how this work relates to or influences your project. So those three kind of major points I hit there, right? The key points of the work itself, an evaluation of its quality, and an explanation of how it relates to your project. Those can be a single sentence, those could be a paragraph, depending on kind of the length of annotation that is expected from your department. So again, that's something that you would talk to your committee chair about, or maybe your advisor. And like I say, the annotations vary by field, and so you want to be sure to talk to somebody about it. And then another similar kind of document to annotated bibliographies that we see a lot associated with non-thesis projects is literature reviews. So these documents frequently serve to place your work within the greater discourse going on in your field, kind of similar to how annotated bibliographies do, but in a more broad sense. The best way to kind of write these is to read through your sources and take good notes. Essentially, literature reviews are giving a kind of chronological overview, typically, although they're not exclusively chronological, of essentially what has already been said about this topic up until this point, what's been researched about this topic, who's been saying what, who disagrees, who agrees, why do they feel so, and kind of what's generally kind of the zeitgeist surrounding the discourse around this topic that you're engaging with in your own project. So again, like I said earlier, it's really easy to write these if you read through your sources and take good notes on them. One thing that might help if you're writing a literature review is to read your sources chronologically by the year of their publication, because then you can also get a sense of how the discourse developed over time. And then it also is a really great chance for you to again, kind of do a lot of great research on the side. Literature reviews and annotated bibliographies as documents really lend themselves to good research habits. So it's always a good idea when writing either of these documents to check the citations and references of the pieces you are citing or the pieces you are reading for your project. This will give you a sense of where previous scholars got their knowledge and ideas from, and again, how the discourse has developed into this point. This also lets you know how long have people been talking about this topic or conducting research about this topic. And then if this discourse kind of came out of a previous discourse, what shifted that conversation or focus towards your topic or away from a different topic, or maybe why are you choosing to step away from the typical topic at hand into something maybe more specific or more broad. Any of those things are great things to include in the literature review, and being able to read through your sources and get really good notes will make writing one of these documents so much easier. More about literature reviews. So a good literature review, like I said, should summarize for your reader what are the key players, or who are the key players in this discourse so far, who's already been doing a lot of the talking, who are kind of the well-respected voices in the field, and then who's been talking about this specific topic already, if anyone. And then again, if people haven't been talking about this yet, why might that be the case? Why is this topic ignored so far? How maybe have we been thinking about this in the past? Why did we get to this point without talking about this already? Or maybe how are you taking this in a new direction that people might not have been considering before? And then another thing to really hit on is, are there any particularly contentious topics that your project will touch on? And if so, what are the kind of sides of these contentions? You know, what are the disagreements about this topic in its relevant discourse community? Who all is talking about it and who all is thinking about it, and what are their kind of differing or agreed upon positions towards different ideas in your field? So I kind of wanted to also leave you guys off with some tips and tricks for culminating activities. The biggest one probably is draft. So written work at the graduate level often requires many drafts before final submission. So one of the best approaches to your writing for your culminating activity is to make sure your work has been through several drafts with feedback from many different audiences, your committee included, but not exclusively, right? A lot of the time, it's really, really great to get somebody who is unfamiliar with your field to have some eyes on your work, to really get a sense of how would the layperson read this? Am I getting too technical with this? Am I getting too niche? Can the average person still kind of understand what I'm talking about, even if this isn't a more academic context? It's really important, and it's really great to show your mastery by being able to explain this to someone who maybe isn't in your field. That really shows that you understand the concepts you're working with. Underneath that kind of drafting idea, though, the biggest thing is to just get it on the page. These kinds of projects are very overwhelming in the sense that they are just simply a lot of work, and procrastinating it certainly doesn't make it easier, although it is extremely sometimes difficult, and we understand that. So doing what you can to get as much onto the page as you can is vital. It is so helpful. Even if you end up cutting it later, it's always better to have it and have to cut it later than to need it and not have it written yet and have that extra work. So whatever you can do to kind of get it on the page is great. Another thing that can kind of help, especially if you kind of struggle with procrastination, is to try to do slow and steady to win the race, right? So like I said before, if you're doing kind of an internship project or something that's kind of ongoing, especially as like an experience-based piece of work or a piece of education, doing learning logs or reflection journals are really, really great opportunities to kind of track your thinking over time. And they're also just great chances for you to kind of continue thinking about your project and having kind of a written record of ideas you're kind of chewing on, especially if you're at the beginning of your project process and you're still kind of trying to work out the kinks about what you want to talk about and how you want to talk about it. This can be a really, really great way for you to kind of get those ideas onto paper just by doing quick little reflection journals. A lot of these times, these are a page or less, just for you to kind of group up your thoughts and kind of say, this is where I'm at with this idea. This is what I'm working through. These are the things I read this week. This is what I think of those things. Any of those can be really, really helpful and eventually might be able to be developed into your actual projects themselves. Other things that might be really, really easy is to do broken up annotated bibliography entries as you're reading your sources for your project, right? So if you read a source for your project and you take some great notes, sitting down and writing an annotated bibliography entry or even a quick learning log / reflection journal, any of these things can kind of remind you, oh, this is what this source is talking about. This is what I think of it. These are the kind of quick things that I first noticed. And even if it's not perfect right when you write it right then, by doing that, you already have some of that work started and done for you. And it's going to be way easier for you in the future if you kind of take these bite-sized approaches to getting it done. Like I said before, reading notes are also really, really valuable for this. They're really, really helpful to make sure that you kind of know who's saying what. So taking or developing a really good note-taking style for you can also be really, really helpful. Another thing that can be super, super helpful when it comes to kind of slowly and steadily working your way through your project is to write yourself a writing schedule. Sometimes with these projects, because they typically tend to be really self-directed, it's hard to have a ton of hard and fast due dates other than like the very final ones. So writing little mini achievable due dates that are good for you to do on a weekly or daily basis. I just this week want to make sure I write 3 annotated bibliography entries, which means I have to read 3 of my articles and write something really quick about them. And they don't even need to be perfectly done. They just need to get a little bit done. And I have a little bit written, so you can always refer back to it later, and it'll be way easier, even if you have to come back and do it a little bit more work on them. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is to achieve small goals for yourself. Rather than kind of having your goal just be getting the whole thing done, give yourself small achievable goals on a regular basis. It'll keep you motivated and it'll keep you from getting burnt out with your project, as these can be a lot of work over a really long amount of time, depending on what your project is. The other thing that's vital to this is staying organized. Like I said before, there's very rarely a lot of direction in an immediate sense, depending on your program. So being able to have timelines and deadlines that you create for yourself or that somebody creates with you and holds you accountable to can be really, really helpful. In the same sense, finding like an accountability buddy, as we like to call them, in your program or through a resource on campus, such as the GSSC, can really help to keep you on track, because there's someone who is relying upon you to get stuff done on the timeline that you already agreed to. And that can be really, really vital just to keeping you on task and keeping you motivated. Additionally, for culminating activities, I think it's really important to remember that the key is to, yes, show what you know, to show what you've learned through the course of your graduate program, but also to really engage with your discourse and showing mastery, in the sense of being able to not only show what you know, but also to cover up what you don't know. And this sounds a little evasive, but in a lot of ways, it reflects your mastery of a subject to be able to identify the areas of your work that maybe aren't addressed, and really showing either why you don't know that much about that area, or where you can find knowledge about that area and kind of patch that hole for yourself. So being able to kind of identify within your own work, what are the areas that are really strong and what are the areas that are weaker. Being able to assess that for yourself or through feedback with your readers can be really, really vital to creating an amazing project. And the biggest thing that I'll leave you with is to remind yourself that you can do this. These are really, really great projects that are ultimately setting yourself up for success in the future. And so I think it is really important to keep in mind that this is a really big project that you're taking on that you should be proud of yourself for doing, because ultimately it is your chance to kind of show off your skills and to give yourself the chance to really show how far you've come over the course of your graduate education. But yeah, if you guys have any further questions about this topic or any others, feel free to reach out to us at the GSSC, and we're happy to kind of talk about any of these in more detail with you. But without any further ado, I think I will leave it there. Thank you all for watching and listening, and hope you all have a great day. Thanks. Bye-bye.